Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. Dave here with you again. So imagine a podcast where you hear about stories that haven't been written yet, and this podcast name is called Somebody Write This. Hannah Keefer is here with me today. We're going to talk about starting our podcast and the fact that we don't need to make money, people, with our podcast. We can do it for fun, and that the idea of having to be a professional podcaster is not applicable to everyone. So you don't have to do it a certain way, and no one's going to take your podcast away from you. Some great tips from Hannah here, my co-host, and she has a co-host on her podcast, Somebody Write This, and we'll have links in the show notes to go check out Hannah's podcast. But here we go. Hannah Keefer here, my co-host on the How to Podcast series. Thank you for listening. Make sure you go over and give Hannah some love for her podcast as well. Here we go. Okay, welcome to the How to Podcast series. I have another co-host. Yay! On the podcast, we're going to be talking about podcasting and all the great stuff and encouraging you listening right now that you have everything you need to start a podcast. And we want to encourage you by our conversation today, inspire you to get behind the mic and hit record and get your message out there. Hannah Keefer is with me here on the podcast. Hannah, welcome as co-host to the How to Podcast series.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and be part of this. When you first were mentioning looking for co-hosts, I thought this was really fascinating because I find that I'm sometimes a little bit outside of the regular podcasting group, in the sense that a lot of folks are coming to podcasting partly. A lot of folks are using it as a marketing thing primarily, that they're, getting their own work out there, and it's an awesome venue for that. Absolutely. But for me, my podcasting, everything that I've done, whether guesting or hosting my own, has always been heavily just a creative outlet, something that I wanted to do just for myself. Nice. And so that's, I find that that's something that, that I love about podcasting, is that it's something that I can just do. I don't have to have a book to promote or have, my fancy website all set up. I can just jump in and do something that I think is interesting, and that's just as valid and belongs in the space just as much as any of these others. And sometimes I think people get kind of this narrow view of it's got to be about, marketing my classes or my courses or my website. And that's absolutely, if that's something you have, a podcast is a great way to do that. But for people who are like, I just kind of want to make something, I'm hoping to represent those folks and speak with those folks and say, this is a valid reason to make one too. This is you are not cut out of the circle just because you are not in there to promote your own business.
Good. Yeah. And I'm not here to sell mattresses or supplements or anything. Yeah. I'm here to have a conversation with another great podcaster. And that's why we do this. And I love your approach. That is, it's needed when you hear every time you go into a podcasting room on Facebook or whatever, it's how to grow my audience, how to make money, la, 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 la. I'm like, well, what about having fun? What about just doing it for the sake of enjoyment and doing what you're doing? I love it. Smart. So anyone listening, you don't have to do all the things that you're seeing. You can just have fun and record an episode. Talk about your podcast, Hannah. Let's do some promotion at the beginning here. Tell everybody what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast that I'm currently running, I've had a couple others go in and out of hiatus, but the one that's most active right now is Somebody Write This. I host it with one of my good friends, and our premise is that we, at the beginning of the show, we have a sort of a Mad Lib style plot generator where we randomly generate a plot synopsis, which is usually pretty nonsensical, and then we spend 20 to 30 minutes trying to flesh it out into something that seems more like a plausible story pitch. We randomly generate a title as well, which sometimes sometimes it aligns and sometimes it takes a lot of work to get back on track after it throws us in a different direction. But we bring on different guests. It's been a mix of people that we know personally and friends, and then also we've reached out to authors and we've reached out to YouTubers and other podcasters, because part of it is very much the idea that I think we create very well sometimes within limitations. That sometimes if the whole world is your oyster, it can be hard to figure out where to start. And I find that for a lot of people, especially folks who don't necessarily think of themselves as creative, so to speak, the putting the limitations in place and saying, okay, this is where you're starting from, you can actually get really interesting ideas from that, having to work within a limited set of data. And so we wanted to play with that. And when I first started it, I started it in 2019, and it was based on something that I would just do. I've been a writer from way back. I love writing, and two of my three little sisters also loved writing, and so we used to do this on our own. I just had a big list of characters, a list of settings, and a list of plot actions, and would pull one of each, and then we all three of us would have a one-page story based on whatever we came up with, and we'd share them. And it was just so much fun, and so you could get silly with them, you could get deep with them, you could go into aspects you never thought of. And so when I was thinking, I want to do a podcast of my own, I guested on some friends before and was like, I want to do something. But since I wasn't going after this as a marketing technique, or as thinking that I'm going to, make this part of my going to sustain my life with this. This is just a creative outlet, but I wanted to do something that I knew, even if nobody ever listened besides myself and my co-host, that I would still have had fun making it. And it would still be something that I'd go back and listen to and be like, oh, that was a fun episode. That one was wild. Like, where did this go? And maybe come out inspired by it. And that's one of the things that I find that I really love about it, is that somehow we always manage to make something that at the end, I think, oh, I genuinely want to hear this story. And sometimes it does, inspire me to gives me a character, or gives me a scene, or gives me something that I am able to take on. But more than anything, it just kind of ignites the fire and the fun of the creative spark of brainstorming together and kind of jumping on and yes-anding everybody else's suggestions until you build something together. And there's something so exciting about that. And I found when we started it, it was, we started at the tail end of 2019. We hit COVID in, 6 months later. And I found that a lot of people for the next year were just like really hungry for that collaborative storytelling aspect, because a lot of folks lost the way that they usually did it, whether it was in theater, or whether it was in D&D, or like they lost a lot of that. And so we found that a lot of people were like, absolutely, they needed that space to come and just brainstorm something that didn't necessarily have a product at the end. They didn't have to then sit down and turn it into something. Just the act of creative brainstorming together was just so much fun. And we're I think at like 90 episodes. We're gonna hit our 100th sometime in the fall.
Nice.
And it's I even if nothing ever comes of any of these, even if none of them get turned into any kind of long story, like, I still love going back and listening to them and getting that kind of spark of inspiration again. And I think it's very much similar to kind of my approach to podcasting. Our criteria has always been, if you think this sounds fun, come join us. You don't have to have prior experience. You don't have to be a writer, or you don't have to be somebody who does this for a living. Just, if you think this sounds like fun, you'd probably have fun with us. So come do it.
Nice. Okay, so a first-time listener to your podcast, where should they start? The most recent episode, or should they go back? Where's a good beginning point?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'd probably start with the most recent. When if you go back to the beginning, you do, for folks who are a little pickier about audio quality, I totally get it. Our first couple episodes are a little rocky in that term. We were figuring out the format and figuring out the microphones that we needed and our setup. But I would say anywhere from like episode 50 on is pretty solid audio wise. And honestly, the content of the old ones we got some really great ones in there too. So I'm trying to think if there are any absolute favorites. I don't know. There are too many individual
They're
ones.
all your favorite.
Yeah. There's some also keep an eye. Some of those are authors that you may have heard of, and so feel free to. We've had Jasper Ford on there, we've had Gail Carson Levine on there, we had Elizabeth Bear on there, and Jasmine Warga, all folks who I found through reading their books. And so
Nice.
feel free to scan through and see. Oh, I kind of recognize this person. But otherwise, honestly, I would suggest the show description for each one of them has the the synopsis that we use. So honestly, maybe that's what I would say. I would say look through and find the one that seems the least plausible to you. The one that you're like, there's no way we're going to get anything reasonable out of this. And then listen to it, because I'm always surprised how when you get three creative brains together, how you can end up with, in just 20 minutes, something that is a genuine, like, I want to see this movie, I want to read this graphic novel, whatever this is, no matter where we start with.
Do you think you would have time in the calendar of your favorite author had you not had a podcast?
Say that one more time.
Do you think you'd have time in the calendar of your favorite author if you didn't have a podcast?
Almost no, absolutely not. Like, I would have nothing to say to them. I would have, or nothing that I felt confident in. And part of this is, trying to make this as fun an opportunity for them as it is too. I fully believe that we all have this creative spark in us in some way. And for some folks, I think it comes out in podcasting, and so any way that I can find to help. I love being the person who can kind of ignite that spark and let people run off and do their own thing. I don't have to be the one who releases the award-winning book. But I teach theater and I teach the arts, and I absolutely love being the person standing behind and cheerleading as everybody else comes up with their ideas and moves forward. And so whether that's me telling people to start a podcast here or on my own podcast saying, hey, here's an idea, run with it, go. That's just something that I love. I love being in the wings for that and being part of that, and getting to foster my own creativity through the whole thing.
Right. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast and you're like, I'd really like to talk to so-and-so, or this person inspires me, or I really look up to them, but would they ever talk to me? Yeah, they might. They might want to come on your podcast and speak with you. And that might be the one reason to start your show, is you get a chance to talk to people that I know I've spoken to people that I should never be in their calendar, right? I couldn't afford their hourly rate for whatever they do. There's no way, but they're like, sure, I'll come on your show. And that's really encouraging.
When we got Gail Carson Levine, who she wrote Ella Enchanted, which was my favorite book as a middle schooler and upper elementary schooler, and I had reached out to her like almost it was on a whim. Like, I was like, there's absolutely no way she's getting back to me. She is an award-winning author. She is, well established. She's had movies made of her books. Like, there's no way she's getting back to me. And so when she responded, I was just absolutely flabbergasted. And I was working so hard during the recording not to like fangirl all over her, but and it was something where it would never have been something that I would have done before. Right. But because I had this opportunity and was like, I have fun on this podcast, maybe somebody else would as well. And she joined us, and I think she had a good time. We had a good time talking with her. And so, yeah, kind of for me, creating a podcast that was going to be fun to record has been a huge piece of it. And that has been a bigger motivation for me than like marketability. Am I going to have fun? Is my co-host going to have fun? Is my guest going to have fun? If so, the audience will probably have fun along with us.
Perfect. Okay. So go back to your early days. You talked about the hard part of starting a podcast and learning as you learn something new. Anything that we can share with somebody listening from your perspective, a lesson you learned early days of your podcast that you're like, I really want to get better at A, B, or C? Is there something that stands out?
Yeah. For me in early days, it was mostly about my co-host and I are in separate states. And so it was the logistics of figuring out recording remotely. How do you record and sync up 3 different people in 3 different areas? A lot of podcasts will have like a studio area where you go in and record, but we didn't have that. And so we had kind of, by the time COVID hit and a lot of other podcasters were having to kind of scramble to figure this out, we had kind of settled into our space. I think I've done other podcasts in the past where it had to be a little bit more tech heavy, where, each person did have to record their own audio individually and make sure it was a good enough setup and send it in. I think we're really fortunate right now that we have, since podcasting has kind of been taking off, one of the great things coming out of that is it becomes even more accessible. And so you have Zencaster is what I've been using, which is a website where you just go and all you do is send a link to your guests and they all go in and it syncs it up for you and it downloads all the tracks for you. So it was a lot easier, especially for getting folks on who like I said, I have a lot of friends on who have never done podcasting before, and it was brand new to them. And folks who being able to say, hey, all you have to do is go to this link on Google Chrome. You don't have to download any software. You don't have to get a fancy special mic. We'll make it work. So yeah, it was. We're fortunate right now that there are a lot of resources out there for podcasters who are wanting to do something. Zencaster was super helpful. I've hosted mine on Anchor since before it was taken over on Spotify by Spotify.
Okay.
It's super easy to use. Is the main thing, is that it's uh, there are so many resources out there for folks who are wanting to do this just as kind of a labor of love, something creative where they're not like, I can't necessarily justify spending all this money on it because I'm not getting money back from it, but I still want to be part of this. And there are so many free resources out there that I was able to take advantage of. And then for my Christmas gift the first year, I asked for a nicer mic. So I put that on my list and was like, here, let me get like an official, and so I got, I think, the blue snowball for like $50. It's not even not that expensive, but it was enough that it was, a step up from where I was.
Good.
And so just continuing to kind of keep an eye out for those resources. And a lot of them have been the same. Like I still use Zencaster because it's just so super easy. And it's something that now those kinds of things are available, and podcasters who, maybe don't have the time or the money to invest into like an editor or a producer or anything like that, you can still do that. You can still find those resources to help minimize your effort and make your process as smooth as you want it to be, to make it still worth it you doing.
Yeah. I like that. And to take away some of the mystery behind having a podcast, and because I know you go to your favorite app and you pull it up and there's your show, and you're like, wow, I'm on all the big players and you can find me here and find me there. My wife, she found my podcast on Audible and she's like, did you know you're on Audible? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, oh my gosh. Like she was so blown away. And I'm like, well, I really didn't. I just submitted my stuff and they said yes. So it feels so like cool when you meet somebody who's a fan of podcasts, but they don't really understand the behind the scenes. It's kind of neat to let them ask the questions like, how do you do this? Right. And some of the listeners are having that same question. And they're like, Hannah, you sound like it sounds so easy when you explain it, but I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm here to learn. Let's help people learn a little bit. Where's a good starting point for your podcast? Are we going out and spending thousands of dollars on microphone and gear, or where would you say would be the first place to go if your friend asked, how do I start a podcast?
Honestly, for me, this has been, for me, before I invested the money in the gear, what I did was I made a couple episodes just with, crappy mic, just grabbing my friends, because I wanted to know if this was going to be something I wanted to continue doing. If the process of making it, if the process of recording it was not something I enjoyed, or if after like 2 or 3 episodes, I realized that it was way too research heavy and I didn't have time to do this, or if the editing was going to take me forever. I wanted to know that before I went out and spent money on nicer gear. And so for me, I would fully recommend, do a couple like low quality episodes to get a sense of what does this entail? What does this take? How much time are you spending in editing? Are you just releasing the raw audio? Is this something, share it with friends and say, hey, I know we're still working on audio quality or whatever. I was like, but give this a listen and tell me what you think, and get a sense of, are people saying this sounds, interesting and fun, or are people like, this is not really my jam. And that'll kind of give you a sense of, is this something that you want to continue doing? And so I'm a big fan of, get started before you have the the gear, because if you spend all the money on the gear and the fancy and all that, and then find out that your podcast idea you have really only had like 4 episodes in it.
Yeah.
You maybe you could have spent that elsewhere. Not that it's not still worth doing, but like, you gotta enjoy the process. You gotta be ready to have fun with the process. And so you can figure that out before you invest in anything else. So that was when I was like, okay, I'm gonna ask for a nice mic, because I have been doing this for a while and I could do this for a while longer. I like this. So that'd be my first step, is figure out, give it a couple, try it out. I recorded so many pilot episodes for shows that I never did. That I would bring a family member on and be like, okay, let's test this out. We do it, and I'd be like, I don't think I could do this for longer than 2 or 3 episodes. I think that's all I've got in this. And that one would just go by the wayside. And then I knew I didn't invest heavily in it until I found an idea that I was like, oh, this one I think I could land on for a while.
Amazing. Okay, so with over 90 episodes, you're definitely down the path. What keeps bringing you back to the microphone? And you have something special planned for episode 100 at all? You can give us a sneak peek.
We do. We're thinking through that. So one of the things that I think has been super helpful is I've deliberately tried to keep this manageable for just me and my co-host doing it by ourselves.
Good.
So we keep our episodes short. we say we're at 30 minutes or less, because the longer your episode is, the more work you have to put into editing it and uploading it and recording it. We release every other week rather than every week. Every so often we look back at that and we're like, can we up it? And I'll be like, nope, we don't have the time to put into the extra social media or the extra editing or the extra recording time right now. And I think it would be really easy if I had pushed myself too far and done too much or taken on too much more of that. I would have burned out a long time ago. But the fact that we're able to keep this, and that limit is different for everybody. Some people might be like, no, I absolutely need, to record 3 hours of audio every week and will love putting the time into it. That's awesome. For me, I was like, okay, this is about what I can do. I can put together roughly an hour of audio a month. And that's something that I can do while still also doing everything else I do with my life.
Right.
And so keeping it at a sustainable level and not growing beyond what we were actually capable of doing I think that's one of the reasons for the longevity of it. But the other thing is that I think I'm still enjoying recording the podcasts. There's so many, the fact that we are, it taps into, first of all, I'm always going to be a creative person. I'm always going to enjoy the act of creating. So I'm never going to get bored I'm never going to say, no, I'm bored with coming up with ideas for something. Because that's just not, it's already tapping into something that is just like a core love of who I am. But also, we find a way to keep it different. It's not going to be the same conversation every time because it's a completely different plot synopsis. And we try to reach out and bring different guests in all the time. We've only had a couple repeat guests because I like having the different voices that are, if it was just me and my co-host, we've joked that we would just do sci-fi stories every single week. So, because that's where our brains go. Yeah. And so I love bringing in folks who have completely different, interests and background and ways of writing stories. And all of a sudden we're writing a Western and having to look up all this research on Google on the fly and be like, so when did this actually get invented? And I love that. And so it keeps it fresh enough that I'm always it's low effort enough that I can keep going even when things get busy, and it's always fun enough for me. And there are absolutely, there are podcasts where you are focusing more on your audience and your audience's interests and needs. And sometimes if that's your real focus, you're going to end up having to record things or pull things together that are not as interesting to you because you know that that's going to be what your audience is looking for. Now, hopefully in, an ideal world, there's some of both. You're still have a core interest in this. But since I'm not looking at this as a way of, this is not my career, this is not something that I'm pursuing in that sense, I really have just the total freedom to do whatever I want to as far as this. And that, I think, is what keeps it really, really fun and interesting. For our 100th, I think our plan right now is where we're playing around. I have been kind of obsessed lately with playing around with AI creative writing and seeing how far it is from what we're able to do right now. I became fascinated with using ChatGPT to write short plays, specifically because looking at how you can see it kind of trying to follow the outline, but it falls so short. And so it just reminds me that it's not going to take over the creative writing business anytime soon.
Thank you.
Because it can't get there. It's not going to get there. But I would love, what I think we're going to try to do, we're going to try to reach out to some of our previous guests, whoever might be interested, and invite them to come on and record. We're going to see if we can have ChatGPT write some little short plays based on the prompts that we had with them back in the day, and do a little series of little play readings of saying, okay, so this is why we need you to still be writing things, because clearly this does not have it, but it makes for a fun read.
That's great.
So I think that's our tentative plan. Get some guests back in, play around with some old prompts, maybe inspire people to go back and listen to some of those old episodes.
Smart. I love it. That's great. I love celebrating those anniversaries because, for your audience, they've been with you and they've been listening and they want to celebrate with you. But it's when so many people start a podcast without direction and they give up, it's nice to see a podcast continue and grow and evolve over time. And congratulations in advance on 100. That's when that day comes, that's going to be great.
And recording every other week means that it's taken us 4 years to reach this point. But that's okay, because I think if we had been trying to go for it faster, I don't think we would have made it.
Perfect. And that's a good message to share with everyone, Hannah, is that you don't have to follow, once a week, a daily podcast, twice a week. You don't have to follow those rules. Those are all just guidelines. You can do whatever you want. No one's going to come and say, Hannah, you broke a podcasting rule, so we're going to have to close down your show. No,
we're taking you off Apple. We're taking you off Google because you didn't post this week.
Right? This is your show. This is your thing, and you have complete control over the release schedule, your commitment level, everything. Like I met with one woman in Australia, and she said, Dave, I stopped podcasting because I couldn't recommit to once a week. I have small children and I just can't do the time. I can't commit that time to it. And I said, you don't have to do every week. She's like, well yeah, but all the experts. I'm like, it's your show. Mm-hmm. You can do whatever you want, whatever works around your calendar. Your community will love to hear from you weekly. Yes, they love to hear from you every day, probably. But they also know you're a mom and you work full time and this is for fun. So your community will love you and support you, whatever you choose. Just get out there and try.
And I'm such a big believer in, as somebody who teaches the arts and teaches theater, I have so many opinions on how we've commodified art and artisticness and artistic endeavor that so many of these things, if somebody says that they want to study theater, they want to study art, the answer is always, well, you're not gonna, you're never gonna make a living on that. And while I think that absolutely it is very difficult to make a sustainable living doing nothing but your art. Absolutely. That is difficult. And that is something that not everybody is gifted to do. Right. Not everybody is able to do or has the resources to do it. But that doesn't mean that you give up on the art entirely, because should absolutely be so many opportunities for folks who want to still participate in the creation, in the sharing, in the collaboration of art without it having to be a professional level. And that's one of the things that I love about podcasting is that, sometimes, you might have to go out and get like fancy art supplies if you want to release something, or you might have to, if you're doing theater, you have to get a group of people together who are all willing to do it. And podcasting is so easy to do just by yourself. You don't need, most of us have phones now that are good enough to at least be a workable starting place in terms of microphones. And you can release it for free. You can record it for free. You can talk about whatever you want. It's so... I'm a big advocate for making sure and keeping that accessible and not putting like a cap on it about like you have to be at this level of professionalism to be able to be part of this, because that cuts off so many people who, I don't think I'm ever going to be a professional paid podcaster forever. Like that's not where I see my life trajectory or career trajectory going. But I want to always have that available, and I want to be able to participate in that and have my little niche and have my little side project that I'm doing just for myself, and have that still be a valid thing, still have that be a valid artistic expression. And I see kind of the push sometimes toward it's all about the monetary value. It's all about the sending people to your business. And I just think that there needs to be plenty of space for people who are just like, I don't know, I feel like I have something to say. Let me pick up a mic and say it. And that's a way for you to be able to experiment and explore and find. Sometimes it's a way for you to find other arts that maybe are closer to a calling that you can do, something that you can do more professionally. But even if it doesn't matter. Podcasting is still something that you can just do it. And that's what I love about it. It's just so easy to just do.
Right. And I love your comments around the pro level, because I feel like the moment you start a podcast, there's a pressure for you to reach a certain level, and you need to up your game, buy better equipment, do it my way, and become a pro, and then turn your hobby into a business and all this stuff. And I'm like, there's so many people who just want to do what we're doing and get on here and build community, share a passion, connect with our heroes, right? And that's good enough. And you don't need to be pushed into creating a funnel. No, we don't need it. You don't. You can do this. And I think that's one thing that's a misnomer for people listening, is they feel like because it's popular to turn your hobby into a business that you have to, and you don't. So if you're coming to this listening to Hannah today and you're like, hey, so you're giving me permission, Hannah, to not have to monetize, to not be a professional? Is that what you're saying, Hannah?
Really? Absolutely. We are not going to put ads in our podcast because I don't want it to be monetized, because that's going to turn it into a job. That's going to turn it into work. And I already have work and a job that I do elsewhere. I don't need to also be thinking about that here. This is just for me.
So this is the one time you can truly be selfish.
Absolutely. And that means that I'm going to follow the interest and keep going as long as I'm interested. And if I'm not interested in this, I'll shift gears and do it a little bit differently. But it means that I always have something creative and exciting that I'm pursuing that is not dependent on people spending money on me, that is not dependent on me being able to pitch myself or sell myself. Because that's, for a lot of creatives, that's like their least favorite part, is how they have to be always marketing themselves all the time. And I can't do that and also be creative. I don't have that much energy in me. And so I'm going to focus on the thing that I enjoy. And if nobody ever listens to it, fine, I will have fun. And if other people listen to it and latch on, great. That's awesome. Come talk to me. We'll have a good time.
So that is the whole idea of the How to Podcast series. That's why I started this. I want to get away from being judged for not doing it the correct way to being coached on how you can start a show and how you can get your voice out there, share with the world. And I had somebody talk to me recently, Hannah, and they said, I want to do a show about whatever. But I went to Apple or wherever, and there's like hundreds of shows about my topic. And they said, I don't even think I should create one, because look at all these professionals who are doing this so well. And I love my topic, but I just feel it's too crowded. And they said to me, Dave, what would I do? What should I do? And my comment back to them, Hannah, was, you're the only you in the entire world. So even though you're talking about a topic that might be similar to someone else, they can't do your show.
It's going to be different.
Because you're the only person who can do that. You're the only one who's lived what you've lived, seen what you've seen, learned what you've learned, read the books, heard the songs, been on stage doing theater. You're the only person who could do this show.
Yeah.
So in a world of a lot of sameness, your uniqueness is you. That's how your show is unique. It's you. So what would you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense, because there are overcrowded areas where there are a lot of podcasts about one idea, but you can still talk about whatever you want to talk about. But also, like, for folks who do want to get a little bit more of an audience, think about what are you not hearing in those things that you're interested in. Why you're creating a podcast, partly because you're interested in this, but maybe also because you do have a perspective people haven't heard before. Maybe you're going at it from a different angle, or maybe you're considering different pieces. I really, really love media analysis, like video essays on YouTube. I absolutely love those. And I really love finding folks who have a particular angle on it. So there can be a movie that can be discussed 100 different ways. If one person is looking at it from the point of view of like the cinematography and talking about that, one person is looking at it from the point of view of the representation of people of color or of plus size people. I learn so much from watching all these different views. And even if they're looking at it from an angle that I never would have considered, it's really interesting to me. And there absolutely will be people out there who think similarly to the way that you do as you're pulling this together, and will be like, oh, this person is saying everything that I've wanted to say about this. And so you can catch people who have that same interest. Like, I totally think, I encourage you to find that angle that is interesting to you, that is unique to you, partly because, yeah, it'll make the audience more interested in targeting yours against others, but also because it will make it more interesting for you to record. Like, if you're trying to follow the model of everybody else, you're gonna get bored with it. You're gonna, or if it's not picking up fast enough, you're not gonna feel like it's worth it. But if you're starting off by pursuing what you are interested in, the way you are interested in doing it, it will stand out. It will be unique enough. It will be different enough that even if nobody else listens to it, you will still have enriched yourself doing it. You will have learned so much, and you will have had a good time, and you will have gotten to gush about things that you're interested in, and you'll have gotten to spend time learning about it and passing on that knowledge to people. And so there's that specific angle of who you are is it is marketable, but it also will keep you like emotionally invested in your own show, which I think is the most important thing. You can tell sometimes when podcasters are like kind of done with their show.
Oh, yes.
But they keep going because they have this following now, and they're like, well, I can't switch to something else because they're all following me here. And so I'm a big believer in, you follow where your interests are, and then if it's not serving you, you pivot and you do something else. And unless there's a really compelling reason for you to stick with it. Like, I'm a big fan of you explore and you follow your interests and your wherever your creative spark is leading you follow that fire.
Nice. Okay, so what about, Hannah, before we go, underrepresented people in podcasting that don't have shows? There's a lot of white guys like me who have a podcast. And what I love to do is I want to see more people come to the microphone from different backgrounds, more women in podcasting, people from around the world. I want to see more people step up to the microphone. How do we make that possible? How do we hold a space for people where they feel safe to enter into podcasting without being judged? Any thoughts? What do we do?
Yeah. I think keeping it accessible is a big thing, not making everything have to be monetized, because monetizing a podcast takes startup time and money. And a lot of people who are underrepresented maybe don't have that kind of as many resources freely available, or as many opportunities freely available.
Right.
I'm also, I think that I've deliberately, over the last year or two, I've really been working very hard to broaden and diversify my own media that I'm consuming, and then reaching out to those folks to try to connect them with my podcast. Because, even though, my co-host and I are both neurodivergent, probably on the autism spectrum somewhere. So we do have that kind of unique aspect of it, but we are both white women. And so I love when I can get folks on here who are from a different background or have a different perspective. I had a friend come in who is just absolutely loves young adult novels with like LGBT protagonists. And so he came in and he's like, yeah, I think one of the things he said at one point, he was like, yeah, let's make this gayer as we can, gayer than we ever have before. I was like, oh, I love it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Go.
And so I love people coming in with their own passions and their own interests and saying, let's follow this. Let's make this character this. Let's make this character like this. And especially since I try to make my podcast accessible for folks who have never done podcasting before, there might be some of these folks who participate in this and then feel like they have, at least one experience under their belt and want to start their own thing. So I just try to, for myself, I try to make sure that I am being diverse in what I'm looking for, so that I'm not always drawing from the same pool of guests, so that I'm not always recommending the same pool of stories. Because I think it absolutely makes us better. It makes our podcast more interesting. Keeping that accessibility level, that entry level accessibility very clear. And then for those of us who are in the podcasting space, to continue to diversify and continue to seek out voices to include with us and to bring us in, and to be able to recommend their podcast to other people too. And just finding ways that we can help support that. And I think hopefully that continues to make open spaces. I think women are more represented in podcasts than they have been in a long time, which is great. Yeah. I don't feel like a total outsider on that anymore. But we've still got a long ways to go, and we've still got stuff to do. And so just for us who are already in the space, it's making sure that we're not shutting people out and saying you have to be this tall to ride the ride. Kind of thing.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, just like at the amusement park. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
forget that. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Okay, so you mentioned sharing podcasts and including others and promoting other podcasts. Again, Hannah, let's talk about the show. Let's send people there. Where do we go? What do we do? Where can we
Yeah.
find your show?
We are on every podcast service that I'm aware of. I think Pandora, we're not on that yet. I just found out you have to send that separately. But Somebody Write This is the name of our podcast. You can find us on, we have a Facebook page if you just search for Somebody Write This podcast, and then Twitter and Instagram. We're both at Write This Pod because Somebody Write This was one letter too long. So we had to get creative. But yeah, so we'll post our new episodes. We post every episode. We also have recommendations of stories that we think people should check out, and so we'll post little things about those. And every so often we'll post if we have a spot open for guests. We'll sometimes post and be like, hey, we're looking for someone this week. Come join us. So we're available anywhere you can find your podcast, basically. But then, on Twitter and Instagram at Write This Pod. And I would, if any of you find us through there, give it a listen. Feel free to shoot us an email and tell us what you think.
Make sure you follow, like, share, and send it off to somebody else that you think would be a great listener for the podcast. Let them know about it and tell them why you think the podcast would be a great fit for them. I love that word of mouth marketing. It really is impactful. And I know if somebody tells me about a show I should watch on Netflix, they probably know me before they recommend it. So I'm more apt to go and try it because I trust my friends. So as one friend to another friend, please go out and check out Hannah's podcast and support this amazing co-hosted show. And Hannah, thank you for making time to be on the How to Podcast series. The door is always open to come back and co-host anytime you want about anything you want. And we're here to help people get out and start their show. Hannah, your thoughts today are awesome. And I know people listening will be encouraged to hear your story. And thank you for being part of the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed this chat.